Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sacred Symbols Plus. I'm your host today, Dustin, and today we're doing a split fiction spoilercast. And joining me, the one and only Rick Hogue. How are you today, man?
I'm doing well. I'm excited about talking about this game.
Nice. Yeah, we were. So this is actually our second time doing the intro. We had a start. Hopefully, we're all clear now. I don't want to speak too soon, knock on wood. But what I said in the last intro was we were talking in the staff chat, and it seems like I think you and I are the only ones who have finished this game on the staff, which is crazy.
At least the only ones that will admit to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So regardless of that, I think you and I will have plenty to talk about. And of course, we have your write-ins over from Patreon. We appreciate you guys being a part of the show, supporting us over there. But first, Rick, I have you captive. I have a completely non-split fiction related question.
As long as it's not requiring legal advice, I'm happy to answer.
Well, no, not really. Have you ever played Ace Attorney?
Of course. Yes.
You have. Okay. So I just finished the first Ace Attorney game.
All right.
And I was thinking about it. I'm like, man, I hope this isn't what the legal system is like in Japan. Like, how does it feel for you as a lawyer playing that game? And it's just like, oh, well, this guy said he did it. Case closed.
Well, that whole process in Ace Attorney is right. Like, it's arrest to trial to conviction in 3 days or something like that. It all seems crazy. And I think that's part of the anime-ness of it, more than just the Japanese legal system. And there's a whole history of how the Ace Attorney legal system got to be the way it is, that they explore in prequel games and things like that.
Oh.
Overall, it's an excellent series. It's one of my favorite visual novels, and it is a standard in Hogue House. It's actually one of the first things that I played with my daughters.
Whoa, okay. Nice. I'm extremely late to the party on Ace Attorney because I like visual novels. Like, I love Danganronpa is probably my favorite of the Japanese visual novels. And I was like, you know what? I would like this game. But I wonder, is there room? How many like lawyer-based games are there? Maybe you're the one to write a more realistic lawyer game.
There are a fair amount, but I don't know that I am the right person, because I think what people like about lawyer drama in general is litigation, right? It's going to trial. It's standing up and saying, no, you can't handle the truth, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I'm not a litigator. So I've thought about ways to gamify what I do, the negotiation of contracts, and sell those or make them available to like law schools as a gamified way to learn about the actual practice of law. Right now, law school is primarily focused on teaching you how to read cases, old precedents, learning the kind of nature of law and legal thinking. But what you actually do as a lawyer is not so much taught in law school. And that goes for litigators too. But as a contract attorney, I have thought that there were ways to engage in the gamification kind of economy and talk about how to learn these skills outside of what is a fairly old standard in reading cases in case law and law school. But I think Ace Attorney and that type of game is a way to think about these things. But even litigators aren't really in the business of finding contradictions all the time. They're as interested in procedure and evidentiary bases and things like that as anything else. But yes, in terms of legal games, I remember a game pretty vividly from the 90s called District Attorney, or DA. That was a full motion video game in which you actually went and prosecuted these various crimes. And I was a big full motion video gamer back when they were made in the 90s. And that was one that I remember really liking. And if you think about it, even Ace Attorney kind of delves into detective work, which is not really what lawyers do so much.
Right.
And there are a lot of detective video games, which have similarities to things like Ace Attorney in the way that people think about lawyers in a game or TV show environment. So I think lawyering can be fun as long as you pretend that lawyers are knowledgeable about every area of law simultaneously and are also doing their own detective work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing is, like, even I've been watching some of the anime with Holly, and that's her only exposure to Ace Attorney is the anime. And she's like, what are they doing? Like, and even her from like watches tons of anime is like, I'm like, you just got to accept it. That this is how things roll in this game. Now, one last question, and then we can actually talk about the game we're here for. Have you ever once been in a courtroom setting and you're like, you know what? Even if it's just a little bit, you just say objection. Like, have you ever tried to like slip that in at some point?
I have never tried to object in a court because I would not have been admitted to practice law in front of that court for that purpose. So we have a lot of ethics and other rules that apply to what we can do as a lawyer. So the last time I was in a courtroom, Dustin, to be honest with you, was when I was learning about civil procedure in law school. So it's been a long time. And that's actually probably not accurate. I was in a courtroom when I was licensed to practice law. So they have you take an oath in front of a judge and that kind of thing. But that was not in a trial setting. So the last time I saw a trial, I was in law school.
Okay. I'm getting the impression that your day-to-day is not quite as fun as Ace Attorney.
Like most jobs, I think it would probably make a poor television dramatic series or anime visual novel. But there are fun things. There are certainly impactful things, stressful things that I deal with. There are people that are betting their companies on ideas that hopefully I'm helping to get across the finish line without breaking the bank. That's my ideal in lawyer land. And so there are a lot of things that I think are important, but maybe don't translate super well to being a video game or a television program.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Rick, I am not here for your expertise as a lawyer. I'm here for your expertise as a gamer. Though this is, I think, the only time that you and I have been just the two of us on a show. I had to take the shot. I had to know.
Absolutely.
I had to know. But we are here today to talk about Split Fiction from Hazelight. This is, of course, the follow-up to It Takes Two, along with A Way Out and Brothers, kind of in that line of games from them. And It Takes Two, of course. I mean, we got to talk about that briefly. A lot of people, of course, liked Brothers and A Way Out, but It Takes Two is where this kind of game from Hazelight really kind of exploded, winning Game of the Year along with tons of other awards. And so, Hogue, as a fan of Split Fiction, I assume you're a big fan of It Takes Two as well.
So I am a fan of It Takes Two. I like that game quite a lot. I like Split Fiction more. And I think part of that is the theme and the environment. So It Takes Two is about a bickering, almost divorcing couple and them trying to figure out exactly how they're going to live with each other, with one of the more annoying characters in the history of video games, with the Book of Love in that game. And that particular kind of story thrust in that game never really worked for me. And so I played it because they had all this imagination and all this great ideas in playing in a co-op environment. But I really feel like Split Fiction took away some of the real frustration edges from It Takes Two for me and put them in a place where I'm happier with talking about writing, talking about storytelling, talking about science fiction and fantasy and things that I'm happier experiencing than what I would describe as a more kind of Conker's Bad Fur Day approach to level design and character creation in It Takes Two. That's still a great game, and it's clearly the foundation of what Split Fiction is. But I didn't like the story or the characters as much as I wound up liking them in Split Fiction.
Yeah, I totally agree with you in that It Takes Two, I think, for me, when I played it with Holly, a few years back, I was impressed that it was like, okay, these guys are really taking this concept of like, this is a co-op game exclusively, and we are designing the game around that. You can't play it by yourself. And in what ways can we kind of like maximize that idea, just that concept of like, this is a 2-player game? Just because we've all played so many co-op games like Halo or something where it's like, okay, we've got Master Chief's twin brother here who they never acknowledge there's two people. It's not really designed to be a co-op game. It works that way. It's designed mechanically in some ways, but not from a ground up perspective. And so It Takes Two was really neat in that front, but I feel like in total agreement with you that like Split Fiction was like, okay, they kind of, and they'd been working on this with the other games that we mentioned, but it's like, okay, let's take that even further And I'm sure they had an even bigger budget for this game. And it's like, wow, this is like a really full-blown AAA 10 to 12 hour game designed for co-op, which is just not really common at all, especially from a game that has like this level of production behind it.
Yeah, no, it feels like they invented a genre with this. And it's been cool to watch them iterate. I didn't play Brothers, but I know they've been iterating at least from A Way Out through It Takes Two to Split Fiction. And that's always cool to see, because you can see how kind of not as fulsomely thought through the ideas were as far back as A Way Out, and how they kind of metabolize to become what they are in Split Fiction. And I think that's always fun to see a developer get the chance to iterate on what was clearly a good kernel of an idea and then blow it out in It Takes Two and in Split Fiction into just a great idea. But I do think that It Takes Two was something of a miss, at least for me personally, with respect to the reasons why you're in this why you're in this co-op environment, why you're having these particular adventures, because I was annoyed by the characters a lot more in It Takes Two than I was in Split Fiction. And I know that that's your mileage may vary, reasonable minds can differ kind of proposition. But I personally think Split Fiction handled the idea of storytelling and characterization better.
Right. Yeah, I can't agree more that like the two main characters in It Takes Two are so annoying for different reasons. It's almost like they're leaning into, it's like, okay, this guy is kind of an idiot, but he's nice, and that's kind of the main crux. And the wife is like rude and mean kind of throughout. I was like, I had a hard time rooting for her throughout and not to make this an It Takes Two Spoilercast, but yeah, it didn't kind of hit the same way with this game and these characters, where it's like by the end, which I think we'll get into some of the writing and where I'm sure we have some different disagreements, is like by the end I was like, I like these two characters. I'm rooting for them, despite maybe earlier in the game where I was more annoyed with them.
Yeah, and I think just speaking of storytelling, one of the reasons Split Fiction works better is because they're just meeting each other for the first time in the story that we're being told in this video game. So they don't come with all this history and all this bitterness that absolutely seeps through It Takes Two, certainly in the early hours, but really continues throughout its playtime for the most part. And that feels like an uncomfortable place to be living when you play a video game, right? They really are a bickering, divorcing couple. And it isn't maybe the best environment to be having a fun, awesome time fighting robot hornets or whatever else you're doing in that game.
Right.
Even though the gameplay is telling you that you are having a good time. And so Split Fiction ditches that. They still have conflict points. They don't see the world the same way. But that's an interesting beat in the story, and that informs the gameplay and storytelling in a way that I think works better. So yeah, I enjoyed Mio and Zoe better than I enjoyed whatever the dolls' names were, and I apologize that I can't remember them.
Me neither. I don't remember them at all. Well, Rick, we have a few, I guess we're kind of already into this, but I have some intro questions from the audience and comments overall. But first, let's start with Robbie Cooper, who says, "Hi, guys. Just wanted to say the game looks cool, and I watched a full playthrough, but sadly can't play." I'm interjecting, but that's truly unfortunate, because this is a game that's like most of it is playing it, but to each their own. Anyway, he continues and he says, "No one to play it with. If anyone is interested, my PSN is DATLIE, and that's DATLIE. Also, they should implement a way to play with a bot so loners can play. God bless." Robbie, I want to put this out there for you. Someone wants to play, hit Robbie up. You got his PSN, send him a message. Let this guy play this game. But I got to disagree that having a bot, I've seen this a couple times from people. They're like, if I could play it by myself, I'd be playing this game. I'm like, man, you don't understand the core fun. Like without that's the game, like having a bot be the other character, it just would not work. I don't even know if it would be possible, honestly.
It would be tricky to solve. I'm not sure it wouldn't work. Certainly it would be a better experience to be, in my case, trying to communicate with my daughter as to what needs to happen with the other centipede head, what have you, in these various things in the game. But I do think you could still have fun with it with a bot. And I do think if there's a weakness to this game, it is the notion that when I finish this and I said I want to re-experience that part of the game at 2 a.m. or what have you, there isn't a great way to do that, right? Whether that's online, whether that's with a bot, however you want to think about it, there isn't a great way to just say, you know what? I feel like playing Split Fiction, and it's a weird time for everybody else, but I'm just my own guy. I can play it right now. And that's a weakness. It isn't something that you can get rid of easily. I'm not sure the bots would solve it. I'm not even sure that pickup group type coordination online would solve it. But it is something that you can't experience without someone else around. And that's going to keep some people from experiencing it at all. And it's certainly going to keep even me from probably experiencing it as many times as I would like if this were a single player game that I really loved, the same way I love Split Fiction.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like one of those, double-edged sword where if you design the game with this in mind to its full extent, that's kind of like the trade-off. And I don't know, like you maybe could do like a matchmaking thing, but then it's like, who knows who you're getting put in with at the same time. And so it's kind of a hard thing to figure out. But for you, Robbie, I hope somebody hits you up to play this game. I hope we can help you figure out a way to play. So this is kind of a good intro starter to just get our general thoughts out on the line from the Slayer Giant. He says, greatest game of all time? Mid-fiction? What's the real truth? Discuss.
Well, I recognize my quote.
Well, I also, on Discord, I put on a little show. Sometimes there's a little hyperbole. I think early on I did call it mid-fiction. So 2 quotes here from us. But Rick, I want to give you the floor first because you've gone on the record saying you think this is the greatest game of all time. Bold claim, but I respect it. I respect going out there and saying it. So please tell us more.
Well, I got to lawyer up here a little bit, as I'm wont to do. I believe every time I've said it, I think it might be the greatest game of all time. But that notwithstanding, I don't want to get rid of your respect. So I'm going to stick to that line right now, which is to say, one of the things people have gotten on my case for, even when they heard me say that, is that it's not, the best graphically. It's not the best story. It's not the melodrama that I usually like in a Final Fantasy. It's not those kinds of things. And one of the reasons I think it might be the best game I've ever played is because it really doesn't, outside of the need for a second player, have any glaring weaknesses. I am used to, even in the games that I love, having something that I really don't love about them, whether that's graphics or music or storytelling or what have you. In this particular case, this game has imagination and surprises and delights all across its entire running time. You never know what's coming next. It is aesthetically pleasing. Its graphics are nice. It performs well. It controls well. It feels good to play in a way that with all of these different ideas happening at the same time, you would expect a little bit more clunkiness. You would expect a little bit more jank, if you will. And one of the things I really want to give it credit for is it really has no glaring weaknesses while you're playing it that I could see. And that, to me, that consistency, that it's always going to surprise and delight, I'm always going to enjoy my time with it, is perhaps even better than hitting the high highs of the super long RPGs that I play. And that might be with age, that might be in my stage of life, whatever you want to characterize it as. This game just was absolutely worth every minute that I spent with it in a way that I don't know that I can say is the same for every game I've played or any other game I've played.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's totally respectable. I think that for me, it's weird. I have conflicting thoughts in certain ways about this game, and that I love how this game has like a solid 10 to 12 hour runtime. And as you were saying, it is really good at changing things up, presenting new ideas, keeping things fresh overall. The main thing that was holding me back when I was playing it with Holly was, and I guess this is just like a case-to-case experience, was, and there's questions about this later, is like Holly and I played It Takes Two, and she had overall was able to play it and not really have any problems. And she plays games. Like, she's beaten both of the new Zelda games. She mostly plays RPGs and strategy games. She's a huge Civilization player. She's not quite as strong in like the platformer department, right? And so for this game, there was quite a few instances where she was like, I'm like, she literally was like, I'm sorry, I'm making this not as fun. And I was patient. It was fine. I was like, it's okay. We're here to have fun and play. It's like, it's not a big deal to me. But for her, definitely there was some frustration points. The other thing is that, and this was the main thing that I think I talked about on Sacred, was I think early on, and this may be partially because of the context I had going into the game with It Takes Two, when we have the main character, particularly Mio at the beginning, and I understand, I guess spoilers are on at this point. If you've tuned in, this is where spoilers are going to start. Mio at the beginning, I found really frustrating and annoying because I'm like, I get it. You're sad. You're mad. You don't like this.
Yeah, she's angry.
She's angry. And through the story progresses, you understand why that is, relating to her dad and the situation she's in, and eventually kind of turns a new leaf with Zoe, is able to collaborate and work together in order to, win at the end. I guess in some ways, though, I felt like I was like, I get it. And the reoccurring thing that was annoying to me was like, anytime they would swap between worlds, it's like, okay, now it's the time for the other character to complain about the vision of the other. It's like, oh, dragons. I don't like, what are we doing? This is crazy. I'm like, we've been playing this game 6 hours. You've been in a fantasy world for all this time. Is it still surprising? Which I guess I don't know. I've never been in the fantasy world of another person's imagination. So maybe I would be acting the same way. But in some ways, I was just like, okay, like it feels a little ham-fisted. The other thing, too, and this is going to be a personal preference, so I'm not going to knock it too hard for this, is that I felt like some of the writing at points had like a little bit of like millennial cringe.
There is some like a little writing, yeah.
Yeah, like a little. I feel like anytime someone talks about like slightly cringy writing now, everyone points to Marvel. It's kind of getting old, but that's a little bit how I felt, where
they do have some quippiness. There is that. That's what I think of when I think of Marvel, is I think of people quipping in very serious situations. And they do that throughout very serious situations in this game. So that I think is a legitimate grudge if you really are over quips at this point in time.
Right.
I think in terms of the characterization, even early on, this is one thing that I definitely wanted to talk to you about, because one of the things that I had been hearing is that maybe it's too predictable, or it's too on the nose, or the dialogue is too simple for those kinds of things. And I tend to agree that it's very straightforward and it's very kind of predictable in its setups, right? If you haven't played this game and you just heard Dustin say Mio is angry, then you should know you're going to find out through all of the universes that you go through that you're going to find out why she's angry. You're going to fight that anger in some important ways. And just like with Zoe, you're going to use these particular metaphors, if you will, to explore their psyches and have them fight their demons, for lack of a better word. And that is pretty evident when the game starts. I want to vouch for it. I want to defend it on this score, because one of the things that I get into a lot of conversations about with respect to storytelling, whether it's movies or books or TV or video games, is that I prefer a story that is satisfying, that has arcs that you can recognize and that those characters actually go through, more than I like a story that is surprising. And I think that now in 2025, and for a number of years now, honestly, there has been an overemphasis on surprising the consumer, whether you're a viewer or a player, what we're talking about with respect to media, in a way that makes the story not satisfying. When we talk about things like Last Jedi, when we talk about things like Lost or Severance or what have you, that part of the reason some of these stories don't work as well as I would personally like is because they are so devoted to trying to make sure that you are surprised. And this game does not surprise you. Okay, you basically know where Zoe and Mio are going when you get enough information to understand where they're coming from very early on. But I still found the ending sequences for these characters to be very satisfying because of the arc that they put them through in the game. And I think that's a good thing. Reasonable minds can differ on that. Different people can look for different things. It is not surprising in its storytelling. It's very surprising in what you'll be asked to do minute to minute in terms of gameplay, but its storytelling is very, very straightforward.
Yeah. I overall, I actually agree with you on that point in that some of the things that I figured out early on, like, didn't bother me. Like, pretty early on, Zoe starts talking about her sister. And pretty quickly, I was like, she's dead.
My daughter says to me when they get to the tree, I think, which is like the first time you get any reference to this sister, she goes, she's dead or in a coma, Dad. I say, okay, all right. We'll see what happens. We'll see how it plays out. She said, no, It only makes sense if she's dead or in a coma. And she has a whole long discussion about these various things. And then when you get to the end of that arc and you find out exactly what her situation is, she had like a party. She's like, see, I was right. Very exciting. Even when I asked her what she wanted to contribute to this video, she said, just tell him I was right about Zoe's sister. I was like, okay, fantastic.
Right. So yeah, it's not too difficult to figure out. It's like, okay, something at the very least, it's like the way she's talking about this is a little weird.
Yep.
So that didn't bother me. In fact, I actually like the fact that it was like, okay, well, there's something wrong here. And so the revelations is like figuring out the specifics, because eventually you do learn that her sister's dead, but there's some kind of guilt going on. It's like, well, what happened? Like, why does Zoe think that this is her fault? And so the payoff, instead of being something surprising, was mainly just a filling in of the context of the story. Which,
and you get that satisfaction. And if I can add one more thing to that,
sure.
One of the things that was really interesting about that early on is that you find that out. You see Zoe is essentially saddened by seeing her sister's name on that tree, and Mio doesn't ask about it. And one of the reasons that my daughter was really interested in that plot point was that she's like, Mio clearly does not care about this, and she's being so obvious that something is wrong. And that's informative of Mio's character at the same time. That to me is enjoyable writing that you get throughout this game, even if there is occasionally millennial twee dialogue and quipping in serious situations and a robot that attacks you for parking violations and things like that.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting, and not to make this podcast super heavy, but it's interesting seeing, because you're dealing with Mio and Zoe, who are grieving in different ways. Mio is grieving for her father, who is going to die, and Zoe is grieving for someone who has died. And something that I've learned about recently is just this idea of like people obviously grieve in different ways. Some people, it's kind of like a glaze over everything in their life, and it's not separate. Whereas some people, more commonly men, but it's not exclusively, is that it's like compartmentalized. And so you can kind of see that, like, Mio, it's like this grief is kind of taken over everything to a low level at some degree, where Zoe has, compartmentalized her grief, where she's kind of, it's not that she's ignoring it, but it's something that she's kind of keeping in the background. But as, your daughter picked up on, it's still there. It's still present. And it's not till later in the game when it's fully addressed that you're like, oh, wow, this pain really is here, and hasn't fully been addressed. And so, I don't know, it's an interesting, I guess, way to look at it. So
they're talking about serious stuff in this game. They're doing it with dragons and robots and cybernetic ninjas and whatnot. But I think sometimes that's the best way to tell important stories. And in this particular case, they're talking about grief. They're talking about what informs the creative process, right? One of the things I find really interesting as a theme in all media, not just split fiction, but I've talked about it with respect to Alan Wake and Alan Wake 2 and other things that I enjoy, is this notion of where does creativity come from? Where do our stories come from? And split fiction is deeply invested in how do our personal experiences come out in the fiction that we create? And then as a meta story to that, how is the creative process being exploited by entities or corporations, however you want to frame this, that maybe we don't want them to be? And I think this reminded me so much of, I don't know if you played this, Dustin, but the Alan Wake 2 DLC, The Lake House.
I haven't yet. I need to, though.
Which is also interested in things that we would expect creative people to be interested in, which is, what does generative AI mean? What does it mean to create things without that spark of human creativity? And in this particular case, the CEO of this company has built a machine to extract ideas, to repurpose them, and put them out under his own name in a way that is very reminiscent of the way that generative AI trains its models. So I think there are a lot of interesting beats in this story, and certainly ones that were more interesting than It Takes Two for me. But I wanted to talk about that because I do think the writing and the story in this game is something that is looked down upon in a way that I think is undeserved for this particular title. And I think a lot of that is the dialogue and some of the cringiness that you described, which I understand. There is some of that in there. There's no question.
Right. Well, you bring up a good segue here. I'm kind of skipping around our document, but that's totally fine. Let's talk about some of the overarching meanings and concepts. And you just touched on it, that this idea that this corporation, I can't remember the guy's name.
Raider.
Raider, yeah.
Writing, Raider.
Yeah. They are using this machine to extract ideas where they can kind of create an infinite amount. And of course, I'm so surprised by this not being the major focus, like talking point of this game online, because it feels so incredibly relevant right now. This feels like something that people would talk about in a game in a few years, since we're kind of in the middle of living it right now. But I'm like, man, this is actually where I think the game shines the most in some ways, where it's like, it's especially interesting to me right now on the day we record this, which is March 28th. And of course, this isn't about writing, but there's the whole meme of ChatGPT now has this thing where it can convert your photos into looking like Studio Ghibli.
Yeah, we're going to make a Ghiblified version of this podcast. Dude,
yeah. And it's been really interesting to me watching this unfold with some resistance, but overall very little, in that it's especially ironic that Studio Ghibli, like one of the most renowned studios that is dedicated to the craft, created its own style over decades. Miyazaki, of course, an absolute master, a legend of animation. And a lot of people are like, oh, look, cool, a machine made it cop this style. And it's not, there's not even a thought to it. It's like, maybe this is bad. And that's one thing I was thinking about in relation to this game, that I was like, man, if this happened, let's say the story of Split Fiction and Raiders ends up happening and he succeeds, it probably would be met with applause, which is, I mean, literally what's happening right now in some ways. So, Rick, I know you touched on it already, but what are your thoughts about, this concept of like, the AI allegory, I guess?
Well, one, as a starting point, I love that creative people are using the mediums that they create in to comment on it, right?
Yeah.
And I think whether you agree or disagree with the various comments that they are making, I think it's exactly why creative people are so important. That they are making games like this, whether it is Alan Wake in the Lake House, whether it is Split Fiction. I would expect this to get even more, become even more of a significant theme as we go forward, as it becomes more apparent that this is impacting across media. But I think that's great that they're commenting on it in the first place. With respect to Ghibli and generative AI overall in this entire conversation, I think what's happening with the Ghiblification that we're seeing on social media is a kind of version of the rule of cool. I think a lot of people have qualms about it. They understand Miyazaki's position on artificial creation and things like that. But the result is something that is so nifty that overwhelms their negative feeling towards the process or how it came to be. And I understand that. I'm a human being just like they are. And certainly the output of the Ghiblified memes that we're seeing so often is super cool.
Sure.
It is
certainly
cool looking. And that's like part of where a lot of people's thought process ends. And so that is why I think that if Raider existed and he was able to extract the ideas of all these young writers, and it's important, a part of this story, that these are not published writers. They basically haven't had any success yet. And that's the point in time when Raider is deciding to steal their creative essence, right before they're successful. And so I think that's a part of the story. But if that were to happen, and then the Raider AI wrote the best stories in the history of existence and people just enjoyed them, then yes, I think the rule of cool would have people celebrating their efforts, even if it came out, presumably in an expose later on, that he sucked the soul out of a number of writers to get it done, right? There's a tension between wanting these cool products out there in the world, wanting that cool Ghiblified image, wanting the best story ever made, and recognizing that being totally exploitative of other people's work and efforts and creativity, their souls essentially in split fiction, is perhaps a road we don't want to go down, even to get those best things ever in the world. And there's a tension because we still do want great things in the world. And it's hard for us as individuals to kind of make a stand against what these giant companies or technological entities are going to do on their own anyway. And you get this kind of hand wavy, well, it's out there. Why shouldn't I Ghiblify my photo with my kids or this meme that I like? And I can't sit here and tell you that I've entirely resolved that tension in my own internal thought process. So I don't know when or if society will.
Yeah. And I totally understand in that when I saw these images coming out, I was like, that is pretty cool. And some of these are absolutely hilarious and crazy. Awesome. To the point where I was like, I wonder how good this is. And I went to try it, but I think you need the paid ChatGPT in order to do it.
I believe so.
I was like, I don't care that much. And so it wasn't like that I was thinking about it more. And I was like, it's like you do want to try it because it would be cool to have an image of you and your family or whatever in Studio Ghibli. But it's like, I was thinking there's that notorious clip of Miyazaki where they're presenting, this was like, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, where someone's presenting him AI based animation. And he's like, this is an insult to life itself, and totally shoos these guys out of the room. I was like, man, there is like this ethical thing where it's like, I think it would be cool to have a picture of me in the style of Studio Ghibli that's this good, but it's like, is it right to do that? And two, also from a work perspective, in that there's been an ongoing thing where I was trying to explain AI based Photoshop tools to Colin that I'm like, technically it's more so machine learning to like cut out an image, like cut out a person from a background. And I was explaining, like, it's different. It's not generative AI. It's using machine learning to make a tool within it. And it's important as AI gets bigger that we make, we differentiate something that is generating off of other people's work and something that is a tool that can be used within something on its own.
Yeah. We need better definitions. There's no question.
Yeah. And so there's part of me, I was like, man, you could do amazing stuff with thumbnails using this. But then it comes back to this idea. It's like, but in the end, when we think years down the line, it's like, is it worth it?
Well, I think the big concern is you train these systems on a style like that. And you said it took decades to make the Miyazaki Ghibli style, which we can all recognize. And do you completely discount the value of that process so that you got the AI doing it? It's great that the AI can do it, maybe, if you're on that side. But the next guy, the next Miyazaki, is not going to spend the decades. And so the world overall, in the long term or even the medium term, doesn't get some beauty that it would have gotten because the AI came in and said, yes, we can copy Miyazaki. And then it's either copying itself or doesn't have anything to copy at all. And we are left worse for wear. So from a utilitarian perspective, I think you can have that argument as well that says if you just entirely dissolve the reason for creation, then creation doesn't happen.
Yeah. And it makes me worried too, in some ways, where it's like the genie's out of the bottle at this point. And I've thought about that, where I'm like, man, I sometimes spend upwards of an hour on a thumbnail. And maybe not quite yet, but at some point, and probably in some ways already, an AI will be able to make better thumbnails than me. And fortunately for the way it's set up is that it wouldn't cost me my job right now. But at some point it's like, man, what if I can't compete with what everyone else is doing because they're already using this tool? What am I to do? So I don't know. I don't have the answers, but it's certainly interesting to think about.
No, I agree. And I had a conversation on AI on this channel. And one of the things I said, one of the things I pointed out is that commercial contract review is what I do most. It is my butter to my bread. And it is the thing that is the most obvious AI solution point for lawyering, right? To say that commercial contracts are all different. They're all focused on different concerns, different problems, different clients, but they all come from the same kind of procedural place that at some level, I and any other lawyer operating in the space is using their own rubrics and patterns to craft contracts that can be read by a third party, a judge, in a way that hopefully shows the meeting of the minds between these two parties and can relatively easily or certainly efficiently be done by what AI is good at right now. And so I know that. I'm okay with that. I am okay with that from the sense that I want my clients, I want all entrepreneurs and businesses to be able to do these things, to create these awesome things in the world, to have their dreams realized without having to pay a fortune to lawyers to make it happen. So I get that. I'm in favor of it. In the same breath, I understand that that's right at how I keep the lights on and feed my family. And so when I say there's attention in me on generative AI, it is entirely attention. It is attention on Ghibli art. It's attention on what it's going to do in the future, where my position is going to be. And certainly I'm not as good at thumbnails as you are, Dustin. Your thumbnails are way better than the stuff I have on my channel. But yes, when I saw the Ghibli art, the first thought I had was, oh, those would really pop on a thumbnail.
Yeah.
Yes, that was the way that my thought process went. So it's a very complicated issue, and Split Fiction even touching on it, right? We're talking about a platform action game, folks, but there are these beats in there that if you want to delve in, if you want to let your mind spin on important topics of the day, it is in this action platform video game with millennial quips. And so that's what I love the most about storytelling in all media, but certainly in video games, where if you can layer it on good graphics, if you can layer it on good gameplay, interesting ideas, surprise and delight, then that's exactly what I love the most. My brain can spin on these things separate from the game and really have important internal conversations, internal dialogues about things that I think are interesting. And so, yes, I put this in the Alan Wake bucket for things that you can really think about if you want to, as much or as little as you want, because this game doesn't demand you to engage with it on that level. You can 100% be a centipede. You can fight cybernetic ninjas. You can be a cybernetic ninja. You can do all the things that you want to do. Or you can think about generative AI and your place in existence, whatever you prefer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's man, I'm gonna have to play that Alan Wake DLC. I loved Alan Wake 2. So, and then when the DLC came out, I think I was waiting for PS5 Pro. But now PS5 Pro has been here for a while, so I need to go and get back to that. But
yeah, Lake House isn't super long, but
yeah,
Sam Lake and his writing team have some thoughts on generative AI. It's well worth it.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna check that out for sure. But yeah, I'm trying to think if I had any other thought. I mean, we can make this whole podcast about generative AI. So I guess I'll cap it there. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the game itself in terms of it being a video game. This comes from Anthony Pallarino. And also Tiz Toasty had a very similar question. I wanted to shout that out, but I went with Anthony. He says, hey, Dustin and Hogue, give us some of your highlights of Split Fiction. What moment made you laugh out loud the hardest? Were there any parts that you breezed past, but your partner struggled? What was your favorite side story? My fiance and I are loving this game so far. Cheers.
What I love about that question is the assumption that I'm the one breezing past things and my partner is struggling. Because I can tell you right now, my teenage daughter was the one getting the apologies from her father in a couple of these sequences. I actually wanted to double up on what you said earlier, Dustin, that I forgot, which is to say this is a game that I found more technically difficult in parts than It Takes Two. It asked a higher level of acuity in various spots. Now, I still think it's a very fair game. First of all, it has very generous checkpoints, even in the middle of boss fights, and that's always nice. But also, I think it's very fair because it has the same kind of mechanism where you both have to die at the same time. So my daughter and I were able to take even difficult situations and say, all right, I'm probably going to die here. Stay alive. Don't focus on shooting the boss. Don't focus on doing something else. Just make sure you don't die. And alternate deaths in a way that worked for us and we could continue to progress. So I do think there are a number of places where I can recall at least a half dozen deaths where we had to restart sections. And that was more than It Takes Two, certainly. But it always felt pretty fair. It always felt like you could see what needed to be done. The trickiest parts were when both players simultaneously were required to do some pretty tricky platforming or pretty tricky whatever. And it does ask that of you, when I'm not sure that was always the case in It Takes Two.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the parts that Holly got caught up on, this whole interaction I find very interesting from a very seasoned video game player to another seasoned video game player, but not one that normally plays these games, is that there's the side story where you have the like paraglider and you're like going through the rings to get higher and higher. And Holly's just like completely, I was watching her, I'm like, what is going on? Like she's completely going like the wrong direction in certain points. She's like, I don't know why I can't do this. And then I had this idea pop in my head and I was like, oh, the controls are inverted right here because you're in flight. She's like, what? I was like, yeah, sometimes in video games when you're flying, the controls get inverted. So it's more realistic to like what a flight stick would be. And she was like, why? She's like, why would they do that? That doesn't make any sense. I was like, I've never really, it makes sense that for some people, they would just be like, I'm flying now. It's going to be up is down and down is up. But for her, that did not connect. And so I ended up going in and going to the options just for this section, changing her controls to being technically inverted. And then she was like, fine. And then when we were done, I went and changed it. And she was like, oh, okay. She's like, I hate that. Why do they do that? And I'm like, that's just kind of the way it's always been, but
entirely fair.
I get it. So we had some tough parts with that. I think too that some of the bosses in particular, I was joking with her. She was like, how are you even dodging all this stuff? I'm like, I'm good. I played Returnal.
I was going to say, they do get a little Returnal-y in spots.
Yeah. She was like, man, I can't even comprehend everything on screen at once. And I was like, yeah, this might be a bit tough for, I guess, the expectations of a lot of people playing this game and playing it with someone who may not be as skilled at this type of game. But it was never to the point where she was like, I don't want to play this or I can't do this. She always got there. It just sometimes took a little extra. So let's see, what moments made us laugh out loud the hardest? For us, it was always the unintentional parts of the game. Like there were parts in the writing that we thought were cute and fun. Of course, like the farting pig and stuff like is great. But for us, it was always this moment where you see the other character just like completely dodge the wrong direction and fly off screen or something like that. It's like sometimes that's just going to happen. So it was always those kind of unintentional mistakes where it's like, you completely pushed me off the stage or you flung me this direction or whatever. That was always the parts that we laughed the most. But what about for you guys?
I think my daughter and I definitely laughed the most during the bomb toss game show side story. And I think the side stories are where they get really wacky with things. So yes, she also really enjoyed the farting rainbow pig.
Yeah.
And I think that we both enjoyed the part where you have to essentially squeeze condiments on each other before you get in the hot dog buns.
Yes.
That is wonderful writing. Super surreal. Great job, Hazelight. Loved that part. I think the side stories overall were standout across the board. Really felt to me like you're getting into like the indie game roots of what crazy things can we do with these mechanisms and two characters. The one that you're in a storybook, the one that your teeth. We just loved all of those. So those were probably the highlights for us. But I told you my daughter wanted me to convey that she was right about Zoe's sister. She also wanted me to convey that she loves dragons. And that dragon entire sequence, like that whole long level, is just fantastic. She loves it. She loves how it finished. She loves dragons. So I am supposed to convey that. I have done so. I have met my responsibility as a father. I also enjoyed the dragon level quite a lot. And so that's, I think, what we like the best.
Yeah, if she has an email, I can send a written report. I'll sign it, say, Father Rick Hogue
There you go.
did indeed mention your 2 points, verified signature. For us, so yeah, we're kind of getting to side story stuff here too. I love in the pig one is obviously very cute, and I love the farting pig, and I was like, what is going on here? I loved going around and seeing what the other pigs were doing. Those side stories were so fun to just see what all the little fun things going on, even if it's not something you're doing. It's just like, oh, what's this pig doing? The fact that the pigs got ground up violently into hot dogs, pretty good. I enjoyed that. You mentioned the storybook one. That one was one of those ones I'm like, man, this is so good. I wish that there was more that were like totally off the wall like this. Like, what if one of these side stories turns into a pixel art video game or something like that? I'm like, man, it almost makes me hope for the next Hazelight game where I'm like, man, go all out doing a million different things in a million different styles. Because that's one of the things that I think was the most cool in this game is that you do get, of course, the split fiction between fantasy and sci-fi, which is the primary part of it. But the side stories are where I'm like, man, I could see this game where it's like one of the side stories is like a noir detective thing or something like that, or all these different things where they can kind of like experiment, not only with the gameplay, but just the visuals of the game and things like that. So, but yeah, the storybook one was super cool. Really loved that one. So yeah, let's see. I'm trying to think, do we answer all these questions here? I think we did. But yeah. Okay, let's move along here. I'm trying to figure out, we've kind of gone all over the place, so I don't want to go over a question. Okay, here's a good one from Drusef. Says, Dustin, with the praise you gave on Sacred, it got me wondering, how would you both rank the final level of this within your favorite final levels in gaming? So yeah, Rick, I was super hot. The main thing in Sacred, I was like, this game's really good and awesome. Despite my complaints, you absolutely should play it. But especially this final level is unlike anything I've ever played before. And you absolutely must play it for this final level. Even though the rest of the game is good. It's not like the rest of the game is bad and you just want to play that final level. Just that final level really takes it up a notch. So how did you guys find the final level? And where does it rank, I guess, in your favorite final levels?
So one thing I will say, and I didn't know where you were going with this because I didn't see that sacred symbol, so I didn't know whether you liked it or not, but I was going to defend it harshly if you didn't.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. You don't need to lawyer up on this one.
The final level is crazy. And I will say that my daughter, having a little less experience with decades of gaming, I did feel after we got through that she didn't fully appreciate how crazy what they were doing and putting on screen actually was, right? So they use the split screen and they have you rotating around the various universes that they're rendering simultaneously for both characters in different places. It is nuts. It is fantastic. I would highly recommend anybody that's remotely interested in this premise to at least check out that final level, but it really has built up throughout the course of the game to we are really going to go nuts when we get to this ending. And so it wasn't a surprise to me that they did that. It was a surprise to me how well they kind of affected it throughout those levels, that each character kind of gets a different version of a meta-contextual thing to deal with, whether it's like an iPad or a television screen that you are engaging with across these universes. I thought it was wonderful. I thought the final boss maybe could have used a little bit more excitement. But outside of that, it felt like the grand finale to this game that had been building up over the course of its runtime in a way that many games don't. For instance, a game that I really enjoyed in Astrobot last year, I did not love the finale as much as some people around me seem to. And we're not going to spoil that because it's not an Astrobot Spoilercast. But there is a big finale to that game, and a lot of people really liked it. this has that same kind of energy of we are going to pull out all the stops. We're going to do all the crazy things. It really reminded me the most, honestly, of the promises that were implied, but maybe not fully kept, in the PlayStation 5 trailer for the Ratchet and Clank game, which I think is Rift Apart in the current generation, about bouncing through different universes and all these various things, which turned out to be just a sequence in that game. And I still like that game quite a lot. But this is the more complete realization of that dream of, all right, we've got all these universes, we've got all this crazy stuff. We're going to essentially launch all these things through portals. You're going to be in different universes, and you're barely going to be able to keep up with what's happening while this is all going down. And to me, it is inspired. It's crazy, honestly, in my head that a video game console can do that at all at that level of performance. So the fact that they were able to squeeze that out through programming magic is very impressive to me. But even more impressive is that it really worked with the story they were telling and everything that they had built up to that point. So I will stand with you on this. The finale, unbelievable.
Yeah, I really like how at the beginning of the level, they're going back and forth because they're seeing somewhat the same thing, but they're seeing different, like, oh, that's not a tree, that's a crane or something. And so you're like, initially I was like, oh, I see what they're doing with this final level. That's neat. That's cool. But then it just completely ramps up where the split screen is kind of going all different directions. Your character is navigating between the split screen. And that last shot with Raider and the two split screens and the two different worlds, I'm like, man, this is awesome. This is like, you don't often have those moments where we're playing great games and enjoying it. Maybe your face is like stone cold. You're like mentally, intellectually, you're like, wow, this is great. I'm enjoying this. But this was a moment where I was like, I was smiling like, wow, I can't even believe someone was able to do this and pull this off, which makes more sense where I think initially I was like, man, I think this game maybe could have been on PS4, maybe at a lower frame rate or something like that. And then you get to that level and you're like, oh, definitely not. It makes sense. This was a current gen only game, but definitely super neat. And I kind of touched on this earlier with some of the side stories, but it's like, man, what else can this team do? Because I feel like even still, while this is such a huge improvement and iteration over It Takes Two, I'm like, man, they're really kind of zoning in on what it means to be a co-op game, what it means to be a split screen game, which I didn't know. Initially, I thought, because when you play this game multiplayer, and we were playing on the same console, on the same TV, same couch, I was like, I wonder if you play this with two people over the internet, is it still split screen? And that last level answered the question for me, where I'm like, I think you can see each other's screens no matter what, regardless if you're playing on separate consoles. But yeah, super cool final level. Definitely check it out. Probably, where does it rank? I don't know. I haven't sat down and wrote down the rankings of the best final levels in gaming, but I would certainly consider that high up there as a grand finale.
Yeah, I don't play a ton of games with levels separating things usually, so I will say sequence-wise, it is one of my favorite in gaming. I would put that up with the Opera House and Final Fantasy VI. I would put that up with various other things that I have really, really enjoyed. Again, I don't want to spoil too many things that are in the last decade or so. So there's a bit pretty early on in Alan Wake 2 that, as just a big fan of the series, I might have squealed. I don't know. I can't verify. There wasn't a camera on me, I don't think.
Sure.
But I really enjoyed this. It goes into a really great song at the end of that chapter, and had a lot of fun with that. That might be my favorite moment, but that's not really a sequence in the last couple of years. So this belongs right up there in the pantheon of really awesome things. That moment when you first cross the split screen and you get the completely different outfit and you're in a different universe, is almost breathtaking, because you just don't expect to be able to do that. You bounce off because it's a split screen. You're in a different environment and you just cross the line, and you're rendered in a different way. And you do that for the rest of the level. But it's just a moment of pure bliss. And I wish more games could do that more often. But honestly, the fact that more don't is probably what makes it so special.
Yeah. We didn't have a write-in about this, but I wanted to ask you, Rick, shortly after this released, there was an article or numerous articles published that there was a bidding war for a split fiction movie. And I was thinking about this. I'm like, in some ways I can really see it and thinking it would be really cool on screen. But then I thought about stuff like this last level where I'm like, man, you're not going to be able to capture that. So what do you think about the idea of them doing a split fiction movie potentially?
I have my concerns, but I have my concerns about any time they say we're going to make a God of War Amazon show or we're going to make something else out of video games, because I don't think that it always translates well into a different medium. Now, certainly we have been fortunate in the last few years to see better translations than we did earlier on in my life. I think the Mario movie is a big success. I think the Fallout show is a big success. I think split fiction could. The concern that I have primarily is that as much as I've talked about how I enjoy the story of this game, I don't know that there's enough there for a purely passive entertainment medium to tell this story over the course of 2 hours or 2.5 hours or what have you. So my hope would be that if you were going to win this bidding war and you were going to take the adaptation pen and write a script for this, that you would say the idea of split fiction is a kind of meta journey through various games and gameplay elements. And so if I'm going to make a movie out of it or a TV show, we have to journey through these various elements of movie making and things like that, and take the idea of split fiction at a core level rather than the story of Zoe and Mio, and make something that's talking about how movies are made and jumping between genres or something along those lines in a way that gets to the core of what they're talking about here, but isn't bound to copying what split fiction is. I don't like the ones that are just pure transliterations of games. I don't love the Last of Us HBO show, for instance, because I feel like I have seen that before. And so I would like to see something that is more of an adaptation than just a transliteration. I don't know how it'll go. I think it would take a pretty gifted scriptwriter to get this to a place that it would be satisfying and successful. But there are gifted scriptwriters out there, so I hope the best.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. Like I said, in some ways I see it working, in other ways not. But
it's just such a love letter to games. I mean, there are so many things in this game, we haven't talked about them a lot, but that are essentially homages to other games. Even in that storybook side quest, I remember that there's a little section where you run through a loop and it says, gotta go fast. And there's all these various things that are references to other things in gaming. It's a love letter to games. It's also a love letter to science fiction and fantasy in a way that would be difficult to adapt to a different medium, but make it even better to play.
Maybe I was overanalyzing this, and I'm glad you brought up the references and homages to different games. Of course, like some of them are insanely obvious. The Sonic loop, and there's like the Assassin's Creed hay dive in it and things like that.
I think there's a bonfire lit at some point that's very Dark Souls 2.
I totally missed that. I saw someone post that on Twitter. I'm like, how did I miss this in the game? Like, that's the one for me. And I didn't find that one, but I was thinking about it. I'm like, man, I wonder, is there like a little bit of a statement here that's like using and stealing ideas via AI has its consequences and is not good, but it doesn't mean we can't use and take things from established art in a way that's respectful and pays homage to them.
You know, Dustin, I haven't thought of it that way. But I think that there is certainly a reading of this game that is, this is what creative iteration looks like. We understand that everything that we build now is built off the shoulders of those that came before us. And that is the way that we respect those things. And Raider going in and demanding them from these people with a magic machine is different than what we are doing here. I think there is absolutely probably a philosophy paper to be written on split fiction from that angle for anybody that's looking for ideas for a dissertation of some kind. But I hadn't thought about that myself, so I really like that, Dustin.
Yeah, it is interesting, and that's kind of the thing that's always come back with AI. Not to fully get back into this conversation, but this idea, it's like, well, generative AI is okay because it's looking at other things for reference, just like humans do. But I like what you said about this idea. It's like, okay, well, it's a little different. Like, we gotta make distinctions of scanning, basically a computer, which I'm assuming open an AI, like they had to have gone and scanned every frame of every Ghibli movie for it to learn and copy exactly, as opposed to a painter that is inspired by another painter's work and is able to incorporate their own ideas into it. It's a little different. But yeah, interesting thought. I'm curious what the audience thinks about that as well. Another fun thing we found out after the game released, we got a write-in from Totanzua, I think. He says, I love that there was a worldwide competition to be the first players to access and beat the secret laser hell level. Winning a trip to the studio in Sweden and seeing their next game feels like Willy Wonka, Ready Player One kind of competitions. And I read this totally wrong. Hold on. It feels like those Willy Wonka, Ready Player One kind of competitions are special and harken back to the retro days of gaming. I think the sentence was bad. But my son is just 7, so we'll be lucky if we can roll credits, but he's really hyped to try. So yeah, this was a story after the game came out that there was a secret level in the game that's very difficult to pass. When you do, you get a message from, it's Joseph Ferris, right?
Yeah.
Joseph. Yeah, you get a message from him. I do think it's hilarious that he's like, if you beat this, find me and we'll take you to the studio to see the next game. I'm like, I didn't know that he was like that accessible. You just call him up, send him a message? I'm like, hopefully these people, I'm sure the message got to him, but pretty interesting, fun little thing in there. Would you attempt the challenge, Rick?
I looked at the videos of this level. No, I couldn't even have found the level. It's a binary input on this 2-switch thing that I didn't even know about until I saw this go down. What's funny from a legal perspective, because I am a lawyer, is I watched this video, I saw the message, and I said to myself, well, that's definitely not a contractual commitment to send you somewhere. That's not a contest the way we think of them. But in the year 2025, with these videos being put on YouTube or Twitch or wherever, it is clear that from a public relations standpoint, you would be bound to that because you'd look bad if you didn't, rather than a legal contractual requirement. So it seems off the cuff when he says that statement in the video, but it had to have gone through the normal process of essentially saying, we are going to do this, right? Behind the scenes. So I think it's interesting from that standpoint. But again, just to get into my head a little bit, this is how I see every news item and every cool video on social media or otherwise is like, well, that probably isn't the way that legal would have had them do that. So it was very interesting. I do like Joseph Ferris because, like we saw from his quotes on the Game Awards and this video now, he does appear to be someone that speaks from the heart very passionately, off the cuff. You never know what he's going to say. And this seems to be one of those situations again. And I do think that that's a part of what makes the Hazelight game so special is it's not just authorship. It's not just a Hideo Kojima experience or what have you, but it is a directed, passionate project. You can tell from moment one in Split Fiction to the end of the end credits that this was a focused project led by a creative individual, leading a team of creative individuals in a specific direction. It doesn't have all of that kind of too many cooks in the kitchen, designed by committee problem that we do see in other games that we discuss a lot in spaces like this and otherwise online, where it feels a little bit corporatized, it feels a little bit desensitized, whatever it might be that you want to describe it as, because it doesn't have that passion and creativity. And Hazelight, to their credit, has done that now in a series of games, and they deserve all the credit in the world for continuing to do it even in this market and environment today.
Yeah, and what's ironic to me, too, is that it's being published by what many view as the most corporate, soulless company in EA.
Well, and even more amusingly, from my perspective, is if you look at that Raider logo, the Raider Corporation, like they are using the font for EA. Like that Raider sign out in front of the building is the EA font for how they are actually saying that corporation. Published by EA as an EA original. And it's like, I appreciate the boldness, gentlemen. I don't know if I would have tried to pull that off. But there is this notion of what do the corporations with the technology and the capital expect from their creatives? And it's not a rebellion or anything. They're not angry at EA. There's nothing attacking EA in this game. It's not that kind of thing. But I did notice from moment one, because the sign in front of the building is the title screen to this game, that the E in Raider is the E from EA, and even the middle of Raider is EA. So check that out. It is an interesting part of this story. And yeah, I would ask that everybody in a creative pursuit try to be as passionate and directed as Joseph Fares is. You don't have to be in the same direction. You don't have to be a carbon copy of him. But it is great to see that, because our world benefits so much from people that are willing to put so much of their heart and soul into the things they create for our entertainment.
Yeah. Yeah. From an optimistic viewpoint, you see something like this be a big success. I'm trying to remember if it was like 2 or 4 million sold, millions of copies sold very quickly. And you hope someone like EA, a company like EA, sees this and they're like, man, if we just let creatives do their thing and are able to make something that is also extremely consumer friendly, and it's not only its pricing overall, but the fact that you don't need to buy 2 copies of the game. It's like, maybe they're onto something with this. Maybe we should, and not just EA, but other companies in general. It's like, man, just turns out if a product is really good and earnest and honest in ways and is fair to the people that are consuming it, it's often a success. So it's I guess good to see that, and makes me hopeful for the future in this medium where more often than not it feels like companies just don't even care. How can we extract as much money as possible from the consumer? We don't care if it annoys them. We don't care if the product is worse because of it, whatever. Something like this being so successful makes me hopeful. So let's see what else. Well, we had a bunch of write-ins about the writing of the game. I'm not going to read them because I think we went over that pretty in depth. So thank you guys for those write-ins. Appreciate it, but you're not getting read. Rick, is there anything else in particular that you want to talk about for this game?
Let me look at my notes here and see if there's anything that I haven't otherwise covered. Well, I wanted to be fair about this game, so I said at the front end that I thought it really didn't have any glaring weaknesses. I did want to mention that one of my favorite parts of all media, movies, video games, television, probably not books as much, is music. And this game didn't hurt me musically, but sure. I have it described here as not very memorable. I didn't find anything to be terribly exciting about the music. I'm sorry if you're the composer at Hazelight listening to this video, but it just didn't do much to move me one way or the other. And as somebody that seeks that out, right? One of the reasons Final Fantasy is my favorite series in video game history is because musically it was 2 notches, if not 10 notches above for almost every iteration. And this game didn't have that. I think that's at least worth noting. And I don't want to end on a negative note, but that I do have in my notes to at least mention that the music really didn't do much for me. I wanted to say that as, I guess, the last thing that I say on this.
Sure. Yeah. Music is interesting in that obviously you want it, if you're creating something, you want it to be, you want every aspect to be great. And we think of games that have really memorable soundtracks. And so the fact that the music is doesn't stand out in a bad way or a good way, I guess is kind of a good thing. Because sometimes,
be worse.
Yeah, I'm sure that there is some philosophy, whether it's movies or games, where it's like, if you don't notice the music, then that might be a good thing because it's just setting in with everything else so well. So yeah, it's better that it's not offensive, as you said, or bad, but it's certainly not remarkable in any way. But I don't think I have anything else really to say either overall, despite my criticism. I'm sure you noticed this as well, Rick, that it's easy for us to come in saying we love games and have some criticisms as well. But the only thing that really gets discussed is your criticism, which it's
the truth.
It's tough as commentators because a lot of times, like if something's great, it's hard to go over and each fine thing about it being great. It's much easier to go over the negative things. That's something, of course, for me to learn. But in general, I think this game is awesome, amazing. One of the best games of the year Is it my game of the year? Probably not. We'll have to see by the end of the year. Honestly, I haven't even, probably Monster Hunter right now is my game of the year, but that's just so suited to my my anime and weeby interests.
I'm holding a spot for Expedition 33.
Nice.
Because that is right in my wheelhouse. That is a Final Fantasy made by French people. I'm excited about Melancholy, Tragic Heroes. I'm ready to go. So that's ready to take that spot if it wants it. But I can't give it to it now since it's not out yet.
Sure. Fair enough, man. I'm excited. That game's not that far off, right? It's April?
Less than a month. I actually just put up a tweet on social media that my daughters were sick enough of hearing about me give the countdown for how close we are to Expedition 33 that because they're on spring break this week, they made for me a paper chain to count down the days to Expedition 33. They added the names of the characters on certain links in the chain. It's very exciting for me. I have it hanging up in my bedroom. Kids are great. They were very excited to be a part of this process, but they were also very sick of hearing about it from Dad. So it's a good combination of that of that particular impulse, and I am very excited about that release. And it's April 24th. So
April 24th. Well, I'll definitely be there day one for that. But I guess that's it for this spoiler cast. So thank you everybody for listening. If you're listening at release, that means you're a patron of Last Stand Media. We thank you very much. Thank you for your write-ins, even though I ended up not using a lot of them. But we appreciate you nonetheless. And also, of course, to Rick Hogue, of course. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I'm
happy to be here.
Appreciate it.
It's rare that I beat video games in the window where I might be available for a spoiler cast, because I am someone that tends to play these things over a long period of time with the hours that I have after a work day or a family day or both. And so this was fun to be a part of, especially since I loved it as much as I did. But I know that they're organizing things like for Kingdom Come. I'm not beating that until 2026. I can guarantee you that. So this was a rare occurrence, and I'm very happy to be here talking about it with you.
Yeah. We have more spoiler casts on the way. There was maybe one comment or something like, man, why do they choose this game for a spoiler cast? It's like, listen, the Kingdom Come one is coming, but it's a very long game. Our hosts are playing it very thoroughly. And as executive producer, I'm going to try to get at least 6 hours out of this, a 6-hour spoiler cast. I'm going to push them for that. Maybe not, but either way, it is coming. A lot of people are playing Assassin's Creed right now as well. So that'll be coming. We did Monster Hunter a few weeks ago. So we are grinding away at these as they come out. But so expect more in the future. All right. That's it. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand's shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.